Okay, it's boxing with the big dog in Dakota, or you could flip it around, Dakota and the big dog. Dakota, where do you want to begin with our boxing talk this week?
Man, there's a lot of different ones we could get to, but it feels like a great starting off point is just to talk about the rematch between Zepeda and Farmer, where, obviously Zepeda makes all of these different improvements and makes it a much more dominant performance and really kind of dishes out a beating to Farmer, while at the same time, Tevin's able to survive through all the injuries, through all the body shots, through everything he's taken, and like win the last 3 rounds pretty convincingly and dish out some punishment of his own. It was really a pretty remarkable fight to watch, honestly.
So I'm curious because I went back and revisited that first fight this week and had a scoring error, which is the most on-brand boxing thing ever. Do you remember much about that fight? Because I went back and visited that fight this week.
I do remember it. I remember it being close. I don't remember how I scored it or feeling particularly strong about it one way or the other, but it felt like, the knockdown could be the difference for Tevin.
So for me, watching it live, I felt like Tevin had done enough. Rewatching it, I felt Zepeda just won 95-94, and the knockdown was the most consequential. I always feel like when an underdog knocks down a favorite, it's hard to win the court of public opinion because everyone, like if they were in a gym, you would have said, "Oh my God, Tevin dropped Zepeda the other day." Like it's hard to get past that moment. I think they just match up in a way where Tevin has some traits that Zepeda's uncomfortable with. And like no matter how they match up and what time, I think that they're always going to make for great fights. Maybe the way Tevin fights Zepeda isn't the best way to win a decision. It's not a scoring way because Zepeda throws more. But the thing that I noticed was Zepeda wasn't able to get into that next gear and separate against Farmer. He was able to beat him, but Farmer was always in these fights. And I think that was the big takeaway is twofold. One, that Zepeda is not without faults. And two, Tevin Farmer is a lot better than people really give him credit for.
Yeah, I mean, listen, there's no doubt that Zepeda has flaws as a fighter defensively, but he does get better every time, and I felt like he got better in this rematch and made it way more clear cut. And I think one of the big things, at least that I found maybe concerning, is there was a time in Tevin's career where he could kind of be right in front of you and you couldn't catch him. And now he's just kind of become an inside fighter where he's still a little bit slippery, but he takes a lot of body punishment and he kind of gives that to you. And then I think he takes his own legs out of the equation. As he's become increasingly hittable and fighting a big, strong volume puncher like Zepeda, it's going to be tough, I think, for Tevin to separate himself against someone like Zepeda, unfortunately, and vice versa. I think, like you said, there are things about Farmer that really bother Zepeda, who is a flawed fighter, but is one of the best in his division. And I felt like made some really great adjustments in this one.
Yeah, it was a fun one. And shout out to everybody jumping on. 15 people already. Big by our numbers. What did we take away from this? Stock up, stock down? Did anyone hurt their credibility in this fight? Did anyone gain more respect? What did you think?
For me, Zepeda's stock goes up a little bit. I felt like he did better, and I think that he continues to get better. And so for me, it goes up a little. For Tevin, in some ways it goes up, in some ways it goes down. There's no questioning his fighter's character and his ability, to take punishment and then in the 10th round basically have his best round was incredible. But I think the punishment meter and his increasingly him becoming increasingly hittable as he's gotten older, I think, Tevin Farmer at the top of the division, that may not be a thing anymore after this one.
Kind of a weird comparison, but he's reminding me of a guy, Gabe Rosado, where we know the skill set is obviously there. Obviously, Farmer accomplished a little more than Rosado. But if you see him in a matchup with a guy on the come up or a top contender, I think that you have to wonder, how does this guy match up with him? And you don't look at the record. I think he's turning into that kind of it's a stereotype about Philly fighters, but it really is true for Tevin, where he's like an old school Philly fighter where he's just taking fights and the record doesn't matter.
Well, I don't think that the record or him losing that fight is what would make my stock go down for him. Again, like I said, it's him becoming so hittable. He used to be such a slippery guy on the inside. And it seems like while he still rolls and counters, he's still got hand speed, he's still got his timing. He just seems more willing to take those body shots, which then take his legs out of the equation.
Jesus M, our guy, saludos. Zepeda loses to all the top guys. Dakota, discuss that. What do you think?
Well, qualify that. Who are the top guys? Do I think he beats Shakur? Probably not. But I think that he's competitive with basically anyone in the division. I mean, I think that, you know, he'd give Tank problems. I think he'd give Lamont problems. I think that, you know, he'd give Morataya problems. I think that Zepeda is right in the mix.
I also think that, like, this is a tough style for him, and that people might be like he went on a good run of stop incredible guys like Maxie Hughes and Giovanni Cabrera. He has 2 tough fights with Tevin Farmer, and I think that people are now like, I don't know. I think that also this is a tough style matchup, and these are back in the day, not to be back in my day, but these were the fights fighters grew from. You know, these were the fights that you take a test, you fight a tough guy, and you become better and you get experience. So I think that kind of in this Instagram social media world, people want everything immediate, and the immediate reaction kind of goes, I don't know if this guy's very good.
Well, but I think if Zepeda's learned anything from this 2-fight series, it's how to pin down a slippery guy, right? You really gotta bang that body, and you can't be looking for the perfect shot. I think we've watched him get better at that over the course of this, 22 rounds.
Barack, Mahdi, I believe Mason stops Zepeda right now. I'm very high on Mason, but Mason hasn't made the leap in competition the way Zepeda has. And when Zepeda was fighting the same level of competition as Mason, we had the same level of excitement for Zepeda. So I think that that's kind of unfair, because Mason, though he's one of my favorite fighters in the sport, he hasn't made that jump yet where we can safely say that.
No, I think it's fun to speculate, and I think that Abdullah is so special, and the fact that we even feel that highly about him, for as young as he is, where he is in his career, it's so obvious how special he is. But there's different things when you jump up levels, right? He found that out 2 fights ago and got really hurt. And so I think that he's got a couple more levels. And by the way, I think I agree. I do think that Abdullah would win that fight, but tough to say it so confidently when Zepeda's fighting top guys and Abdullah is still in a prospect to fringe contender type of opponent.
Well, I mean, and Mason hasn't headlined a card yet, and that matters. He hasn't carried a show. He hasn't had to carry the brunt of a promotional muscle. Like that stuff weighs on fighters, and you want to see how they evolve into that position. So I think that, but I really like.
Which I think he will. It just hasn't physically done it yet.
I mean, it's pretty close. Like, we have to believe that that's in this year. Abdullah Mason will probably headline a card, given the excitement around his career. Any other things you want to touch on about this main event fight?
It was a hell of a fight, man. Shout out to Tevin. He's just been around for so long and fought so many top guys, had a tremendous career, and at least as a fan of his, it was concerning to see him get hit so much. But I just have a tremendous amount of admiration for the type of fighter he is and the type of career he's had.
Okay. Other fights on this card that I'm trying to remember off the top of my dome. I really like the Valle Marlen Esparza fight.
That was the one I was going to bring up as sort of what felt like the other significant fight of the card. Kind of weird that it was the opener, because it felt like, at least athletically, it was probably the second most or the most significant fight of the night. And it was a great fight too. I mean, I feel like we haven't seen Esparza too much over the last few years. I felt like she kind of brought her A game, and Valle was just able to beat her by having more volume, by being sharper, by being more active. But it was a hell of a fight.
I also wanted to bring up the fact that Esparza's missed weight in 3 fights in a row, I believe now, which is not the greatest thing. Valle moved up to flyweight she came in under the limit, I believe at 110 pounds, 10.8 or something like that. What are your thoughts on her future in the division? Because, like, obviously Fundora's at this division. She's one of the best, if not the best, women's boxer in her prime right now. Do you see that as a interesting fight, or is that Fundora fighting another famous name, but it's a fighter who might be a little undersized for probably one of the biggest fighters in terms of weight and height differential?
Well, there's no doubt she's super undersized for that fight, but I think that there's not going to be too many fighters, at least at 108 and 105 right now, as talented as her, and they can throw the kind of combinations that she has. And like we always say, Lukey, experience matters. She's got 10 rounds with Esparza. She's got 10 rounds with Seniesa Estrada. And so I think that there's plenty of edges in experience that she has over Fundora. That's absolutely a fight I want to see.
It feels like Yoka has some star qualities to her. When she does the media workouts, when she does it, seems like she was actually getting as much attention as Marlen Esparza, or not Marlen Esparza, William Zepeda. Some of that could be that she's pretty, right? People are naturally going to look at like a pretty girl. But I also think that there are lots of pretty girls that don't get attention in boxing. There's a talent component. There's a way you conduct yourself that's quote unquote a star thing. And over these past couple of years, I've noticed with Valle, there is a level of like a star to her. She has a personality that people are drawn to. And I think she's also shown a willingness to kind of make good matchups. You know, she's shown a willingness to kind of actively pursue fights. So I'm interested to see where this leads to.
She's also super reliable, Lukey. How important is that, right? Like, not, consistency is one of those things we look for, and I just feel like I know what I'm getting with her.
Yeah, you're not, inconsistent is something we always bring up on this show, and she's very consistent, if anything, too consistent, because you can almost predict how she's going to fight in every fight. But I see her as a promising person. Do you think that there's any chance that the Seniesa Estrada rematch ever happens, or is Seniesa done?
I think she's done, but if she's not done, that's a fight that I would like to see. And the more, meaningful fights that Yoka wins, I think the more exciting that is, because their fight, when it was a 6-4, 7-3 kind of fight.
Lukey, do you know why Valle left Coach G? I don't. But like oftentimes, like when you go into like a grudge match, like another example is like Sandy Ryan had a coach. I guess Kay was involved with the last camp, but I think the coach was Flick. You don't see Flick in this fight. Like a lot of times when you have an emotionally hard fight and it's someone that you've kind of just met along your boxing journey, it's not someone you came up with, those people might not make it for the full journey. If there's adversity and there's a personality difference, and no one ever really knows what happens, because sometimes, there's different equations, but that, that's how I see that. Valle needs to move on from Seniesa, look more for more champions and other top boxers. I think she's doing that. I think that you could have criticized her at one point in her career for being too focused on Seniesa, but I think she's really focused on making interesting and compelling fights. And to be honest with you, fighting Esparza at flyweight to me was a big step up and a huge risk for her.
Now that's a ballsy matchup to take.
Because Esparza might not, like, she might have some issues on the scale, but she's got a dog mentality and she's a mean fighter. And I thought this was an impressive performance.
I did too. If anything, it was probably the best and tough with the main event, but I thought it was the closest and best fight of the card.
I want to throw one more out there. Oscar Collazo. I absolutely love this guy. It just kind of sucks that he fights at a weight class that we basically, if we're being real, we don't care about. We don't know much about. But it's pretty obvious this guy has something that's special, being able to stop guys at a lower weight. Really unfair. It's kind of like Yoko, where we're like, yeah, we don't know the fighters, so we need you to move up away from weight classes you completely dominate. But it's definitely feeling like he's a guy that we'd like to see do the in-a-way thing of win 2 or 3 belts, get to flyweight and be like, oh, he's 3-division champion in 7 months. That's pretty cool. But to me, watching him, there's something somewhat special, if not really special, about him. And I've pretty much never really been that interested in the 105-pound division unless it's like Finito Lopez, Ivan Calderon. When I've been interested in fighters in these divisions, typically it's been a very, very special fighter. Dakota, what are your thoughts?
I think he's incredible, man. He's obviously missing that iconic dance partner, that iconic matchup. I think the issue for me with him, at least right now, is similar. It's different, but it's similar to how I feel about Kenshiro, where it's very apparent that Kenshiro is very talented. It's very apparent that he's very entertaining, but I have no real context for who he's fighting, and he's getting hit more than other elite fighters do in their best nights. And so I get that these are exciting champions, and they're, by far the best guys in their divisions. But like you said, and I don't even know if it's about size, because then you go to 112, 115, there is talent. There just isn't that much for them down there. And so it's tough for me to get as excited about Collazo when I have no context for the opponent. He is dominating, but he's getting hit the whole time.
Yeah. So any other fights from this card that you want to talk about?
I think we fit it, bro.
Okay. So Mikaela Mayer, Sandy Ryan, why don't you take it?
I thought Mikaela was really special in this one, man. I mean, she just really separated herself. I thought she was the better, more dynamic fighter with the better game plan, the better mentality, more confidence, more experience, better track record. And she just dogged it out, even through cuts, even through fighting someone naturally bigger. She dominated this one. And I think, at least for me, she solidifies herself as a pound for pound type of fighter.
Yeah, I didn't see it as competitive at all. I thought that Mikaela dominated.
Maybe 2 or 3 rounds, maybe.
But I thought that she kind of gave Ryan a boxing lesson in this fight. She used her distance and range. And to me, this is the Mayer I'd always wanted to see, using these attributes. And it just looked like a levels fight. Sandy Ryan, obviously, to me, is a world-class fighter, but she's just not, whether it's experience or if she won't get to that next point, she's struggling to get to that next level, whereas Mayer just seems to have another gear. Jesus M says, Ryan only won 8 and 9 rounds on my scorecard. Don't know what her game plan was. I think her game plan, and you correct me if I'm wrong, Dakota, was physicality, pressure, and overwhelm her with strength. And that was the only plan that I saw.
I mean, I think the plan, from some of the things she said this week, her plan was to try to be more technical and be more calculated. And so she wasn't putting the same kind of pressure on. She was trying to land her jab. She was trying to counterpunch. And some of that was really good. But she also, it was too few and too far between. And meanwhile, Mikaela's jab was fantastic. She was throwing all kinds of combinations. And she is hitting harder at this higher weight. There's no doubt about it. And so I think that started to add up. And by the end, she was really separating.
It's a good fight. It's a shame that we can't really go into detail more than that. It's like, it's always sucks, right? When a fighter has like one of these good performances, but they separate and it's a dominant performance. What do you say? Like, it's a good performance. I think, to me, Mikaela's starting to enter into that Hall of Fame tier. 100%. She's starting to enter the Hall of Fame tier because she's checking a lot of boxes. This is her second great rivalry of her career. The Bumgarner rematch has to happen at some point. You could argue that she's never lost a fight as a pro. The Tasha Jonas fight.
She's getting better, bro. She's still getting better. I mean, she's in her mid-30s at a higher weight, getting better. I mean, that's what great fighters do.
Yeah, what do we talk about? Lose and reinvent yourself. She lost and reinvented herself in a higher weight.
Even if she felt like, fuck this, I didn't fucking lose either of these fights, she still did it. She still went and retooled some things, clearly, even if it was just the weight change.
So I'm excited about that. Lukey, do you know the payday for Ryan Mayer? I don't. Someone will come out.
We don't get into numbers like that.
We're not checking their. I hope they got paid a lot, because they really laid it on the line. And I'm a big Sandy Ryan fan too. I think Sandy's a great fighter. I think that the problem is the depth in these divisions. Sandy, no disrespect to her, she had to jump from a really high level prospect into a contender, and she didn't really get that middle class. And we see that in some divisions in boxing, flyweight, and those. But I just feel like the experience in this second fight really showed that Mayer just had that pro experience, the amateur experience. You just saw someone that just had was able to reference things that Ryan was learning on the fly. She didn't have those reps.
Mikaela was locked in and unfazed. And she said something in one of the interviews on the telecast where she was like, every time you look at Sandy, it looks like she's about to start crying. And it's kind of true. I mean, I don't know what is going on in her life or with her mental, or if it's the paint incident, whatever the case may be. Any clip I saw her in this buildup, she did look like she was on the verge of tears. And so there's something about controlling her emotions or her mentality that just isn't straightened out, to be honest.
And I think that Mikaela has a good read on people. So when she says stuff like that, I think she's
stone cold, bro. She's stone cold.
But I think she weaponizes words, and when she feels she has a read on you, she's gonna say it because she thinks it's gonna bug you. And I think that I thought it was interesting, right? The first fight,
kind of accurate though.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not opposed to it. I think the first fight was interesting because there was a lot of talking, right? Bickering. This fight, there wasn't a lot, and that face-off at the press conference and the weigh-in, they really mugged each other, and it was like intense. And I feel like the intensity sided with Mayer, who was just comfortable with being at that level. Whereas Ryan, like you said, I think that whatever she's dealing with emotion, that's experience. And Mayer has probably worked through that, and possibly she's felt that and seen that Ryan's working through. And that's how she knows Ryan has that. You know, that's like why I always say when someone loses a fight, it's a weapon, because you can see in another person what you were doing when you lost a fight, right? You can be like, oh my God, that's how I felt. Oh my God, this, you know, you pick up on traits. So I just think it was experience. I think it was tremendous performance by Mayer, who I think is really one of the unsung heroes of this generation. She's really flying under the radar. And she's one of the most interesting American boxers currently.
Couldn't agree more, bro, to be honest. And she's consistently, her whole career, taking tough matchups. There's no dancing around the tough fights with her.
And outside of like maybe one or two things, not embarrassing. Really love a fighter who's not embarrassing. Big fan of that, you know, because that boxing doesn't always give us that. Co-main event in this, our guy Brian Norman looked like $1 million trillion bucks. I think that he has figured it out. Sure, you could say this opponent might be tailor-made for him, but I think Brian is a guy who got to that level, had some bumps and bruises, and then when it clicked, I think now he really is confident, and he's really locked in on things that we want to see: his distance, timing, range, weaponizing his athleticism. I think he's a very dangerous guy in this division that's probably getting overlooked.
I agree with everything you're saying. The only reservation I still have with him just a little bit is I don't know how much you can rely on him. You know what I mean? Like I see all the things, but I'm still thinking about the multiple other performances we've seen from him where he just looks kind of lost. And this was a great performance. There's no doubt about it. The Santillan fight was sensational, but I'm still not totally sold. It's not, and I'm not against him, or I'm not open to being sold. I just don't know how much you can rely on him at the top just yet.
Yeah, I mean, I think that honestly gets me excited. Like, I enjoy like a guy who has a little, like we talk about consistency with the great fighters. I like a lot of the Brian Norman thing. I like that he has a loving dad who goes on people's podcasts and will yell at you. I like that his interviews, like, he's really, really intense, and he's like trying to get into the guy's face, but he's not quoting like embarrassing things. Like, he's just passionate. He has conviction, right? His words, he says what he means. But like, there is a level of like, it's not unheard of for Brian to be off for 5 rounds. And I think that also means he's going to probably be in a fight of the year, because those are the guys, like the guys that have some flaws, make the best fights.
Right. And the wins and the way he's getting them validate a lot of that. And he's 23 years old, which I think is so easy to forget with where he's at and how long we've been watching him already. He's way ahead of the program for basically anybody his age. So all of those things, you know, I still, there's just certain things I still need to see the growth for me to really feel like, okay, this is a guy. But beating Santillan the way he did, winning this fight the way he did, Let's see him in with Uncle Abel Ramos. I would love to see that.
Oh,
Let's get
with
him in some
Uncle
film.
Abel? That's a
the
tough
fight.
one.
That's
With
a tough
Uncle
one.
Abel, man. Nobody wants to fight Uncle Abel after the Mario Barrios fight, man. I feel like
But
he's one of
that's
the most
the type of
avoided
fight.
guys.
That's the type of fight I would like to see from him.
Well, one fight that they brought up in the chat, is Norman going to fight Jin Sasaki?
I'd watch that fight. I like that matchup. I think Sasaki's really fun and has fast hands. He's explosive. Why not?
That could be a fight of the year type fight, because
For
that's
sure.
one of those fights where if Norman doesn't start, that could go two ways. Fight of the year, or Norman beats the hell out of him.
Or just quick. Because the other thing about Norman that you got to give him credit for, the power is the real thing. He's got that switch your lights out type of power.
Well, that's how he skipped the steps, right? Like that, you don't become a 23-year-old champion if you don't have one thing that's like abnormally great. He's got like one punch power, and he might be figuring out the rest of the stuff, but he's got real power.
Yeah.
Dakota, how many defenses of a belt does Norman Jr. need in order to face other champs?
I think the welterweight division does not have anything exciting enough going on for these guys to not unify. So to me, if you got a belt,
I got to stop you on that one. In 2 weeks, we got a great fight with Stanionis and Boots. That's exciting. But outside of that fight, I agree with you. But Stanionis versus Boots, that's a fight. That's a unification. That's a real fight.
totally,
And both of those guys deserve credit for stepping up on that one.
it's a great matchup. But the division as a whole doesn't have it's not the welterweight division of 10 years ago of the original PBC run. It's just not that division. And so when there isn't 10 exciting fighters for him to choose from, I'd rather just see us figure out who the best guy is. It's like middleweight. Like, I just want to see Lara and Adames do the fight just to get the belts in this. You know what I mean? When you don't have that popping off, I think it just makes sense.
Okay, so we're going to go through the undercard now because we're the nerds and we do the undercard. Carrington looks great, should fight for a belt. Tiger Johnson, to me, had the performance I wanted him to have. Love a little Tim Bradley. I told you after. I like Tiger. Like, he has the skill set. I really like Tiger's skill set. I want to see him be a little bit of an a-hole at times. Like, I want to see that boxer mean guy from him. So I liked seeing him get chippy after the fight. Diedrich Kroklam, second pro fight, really liked the power. Obviously he's a young guy, but that right hook he was throwing. Good. What is it?
Very chin up in the air right now for me.
Yeah, this is a very young guy in his development. Like, when we're talking about it, I see a guy that's going to get to 15, 20 fights before he's really stepped up. And you can tell that, like, what got him to the dance is power. Because, like, as you said, there's some things that when you look at it as a real fight guy, you go, ooh, you got to work on that. But what I saw was he throws that left hand right hook, and that was a game changer. He had a certain level of competition guy, snapped the head back. I liked the stoppage because the stoppage, to me, that guy was not going to win that fight. And there was no reason for this guy who was wincing in pain every time he's getting hit with a right hook. It makes no sense to just be like, okay, bub, go back out there. Like, he had no defensive response and he was flailing punches. That was fine for me. Manny Chance did all right. He's a young kid, 18 years old, big stage. I think he's 18. It's just hard when you're young. You go to the big stage. So I'm not going to judge him. To me, he's adjusting to the amateur to pro. Is there anyone that I'm missing? I just kind of glanced over.
I don't think you're missing anybody. I'm sure we are, but I think that Tiger Johnson and Tszyu for me were the stars of the night. It felt like Tiger kind of turned a corner, moving up in weight. He just looked more comfortable. He looked like his legs were under him. He looked more assertive. He looked like he was hitting harder. It was one of those what's not to like. I totally see what you're saying about some of the killer instinct part of it. And Tszyu is, I think if there's been any concern about him not getting knockouts or having some tough fights here and there, he's clearly still a guy at this weight. I'm not sure, he's been in that Arnold Barbosa spot where it's like, the next one. He's had that going for a couple of fights now. I don't know at what point it's the next one now, but I hope it's soon.
Yeah, I mean, that's that. I wanted to throw out a fight that I'm sure you didn't watch, but for the hardcore fight enthusiasts, which I think we speak to, um, Yabuki took on Angel Ayala and won the IBF World Flyweight title. If you're not familiar with Yabuki, let me give you a backstory on him. I'm sure I'm saying this all wrong, by the way, but he is the guy that's best known for knocking out Kenshiro Taraji. And him and Ayala had a fight that was just sensational from the clips that I've seen circulated on the internet. Back and forth fight. He stopped.
Oh, did we lose him? Well, we've lost Luke.
No, I mean, I think I'm here. Like, I guess my internet's going. Where did it cut me off?
Yabuki and Ayala.
Ibuki. Well, Yabuki, he wins this fight, 12th round technical knockout. The fight just looks like one of these epic flyweight bouts that would have been circulated on a VHS tape and gym lore if it wasn't the internet. Oh my God, you got to see this guy, right? And Yabuki's knocked out Kenshiro. Kenshiro knocked him out in the rematch. It kind of sets the stage for an interesting and compelling trilogy with Kenshiro, who kind of, as you and me said, he kind of needs some fights that we care about. This makes a fight that we care about. And this is a banger of a bout. So if anyone, I haven't even seen the full fight. I've just watched clips of it. But if anyone can see this fight is worth acknowledgement because it was just, two guys laying it on the line. Are they going to be superstars? Probably not. But this is like what a title fight probably should be, where both guys went to win the whole fight.
Ibuki's a tough guy, man. Anytime I've seen him, I watched that last Nanta Shenga fight. That was a hell of a performance. He's also starting to work on some star-like qualities, it feels like.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I just think it's a no-brainer to make a unification bout with Kenshiro next. That's a delightful fight, because he's knocked out Kenshiro. Kenshiro knocked him out. So now you got to fight. So I just wanted to bring that up because I feel like that fight's probably going to fly under the radar, but people that are probably listening to our show, that's probably in their wheelhouse of fights that they'd want to watch. It's just like there's no nonsense, there's no gimmicks. But if you want to watch two tough dudes and you're not worried about them being 5'4" or 5'5", you won't go to your local bar and be like, oh, I could put the guy in a bear hug and I could beat him. You're not like that, then
you guys go into an alley. Two guys get locked in a room, one guy comes out. Those arguments, those are fun.
You know what's funny is you say that all the time, and then some dude I was talking about.
I know, and then you screenshot a thing where some dude is like, all right, you put these two guys in a room, who's coming out?
And then I was out somewhere, and some guy I was like, they did the classic. I was like, oh, I like boxing. And some guy goes, oh, yeah, I like boxing, but I'm really a UFC guy. And I'm like, okay, cool. Here it comes. But I don't care because I don't really watch UFC and it doesn't matter to me. I like talking fights, right? So the guy does that and whatever. And then he goes, well, see, here's the thing. What happens if they get in a street fight? And I'm like, you're a pro fighter. What is a street fight? That's like saying, well, what happens if LeBron James plays at the Rucker? And there's a guy who knows how to do all these dribble moves and LeBron doesn't know how to do the dribble. It's not like an A to B comparison. That's the way I see it.
My favorite was when an MMA fan would say to me, dude, do you think Floyd's fought anyone who hits as hard as Conor?
That's a pretty good take. That's a good take, bro.
So sick.
Okay, so let's go into and Money Motivated said, I want to see Brian Norman versus Rowan Polanco. That's a fight. That's a banger. Rowan Polanco is one of my favorites, bro. Every time he delivers, good puncher, really good. Ace Hussein, Nicholas Flaz beats Gabriel Maestre, then Norman versus Flaz. Excellent. That fight I don't believe is on anymore. It was a ProBox main event, but I believe now Kent Cruz is in the main event, no longer Nicholas Flaz. Nicholas Flaz, really great fighter. And Guido versus Richard Torrez is a great fight. We're going to be getting to those. But first, not an ad read. I know you got scared for a second. It is the Tim Tszyu versus Joey Spencer preview. Dakota, what are your thoughts?
This weekend?
That's this weekend. Yeah. What are your thoughts?
I have very minimal interest in this fight, and it's not anything against either guy. We've just seen Tim get beat up really bad in that last fight, and I know that Joey Spencer is a tough fight for him to take as a comeback fight, but as a matchup with all the talent at 154, it's just not really doing it for me. I hope that, you know, Tim has a successful comeback, but I also think that Joey could be a bit of a spoiler in this one, man.
Yeah, it's a dangerous fight, right? Because with Thurman came back against Brock Jarvis, there was a clear talent differential, and Jarvis had fought at different weights. Joey has a deep amateur career. He's never probably lived up to his potential as a professional boxer, but he's been in some tough fights, and he's fought experienced guys. You and me think very highly of Jesus Ramos Jr., so I think even losing to Jesus, that's a different level. I think Jesus is a better fighter than Tim Tszyu, if I'm being quite candid.
Oh, yeah.
And Joey had a really a gut check fight in December on a Salida Promotions card that I thought was kind of good for him. To me, this really comes down to, okay, if this is the Tim Tszyu that fought Tony Harrison, the guy that didn't think punches would hurt him, and he could
Brian
do
Mendoza in that fight. That's the guy I want to see.
Brian Mendoza, right? So if he was in there with Mendoza and he was weaponizing his power and he was doing some of those, it's not quite Golovkin, but it's reminiscent of Golovkin in this era when we don't have a Golovkin. He's doing some of that stuff. What the freak? Like we know the outcome. But for me, it's like he took basically 2 knockout losses. The amount of blood he lost in the Fundora fight was very scary to me. And then after that fight, you know, getting brutally stopped, probably taking too much punishment against Beckram. It's just, I'm worried. And then it doesn't feel like it's that long of a layoff, you know, October to April. I just feel like they're really not giving him time to recover. And it's who knows why. But I do think there's the risk he shows up and, you know, he gets old overnight because of these damaging and punishing fights he's taking.
Dude, it feels like, you know, unless he performs, like really performs in this one, we're very quickly moving into like George Kambosos territory, where I know the Australian market gets out behind their top guys. And when they have a guy that gets to the top, it's very exciting. But how many times do you show up to watch that guy lose? You know what I mean? Or to watch that guy have a disappointing performance. I think we could move into George Kambosos territory here. And honestly, you know, he may be able to find himself in multiple more big fights just off of that. I'm just not that interested in seeing it. So my interest in him really moving forward hinges on how well he does here.
So I think Tim is the favorite in this fight pretty clearly. I think Tim should win, but I think that the way he wins matters to me. If I want to get excited, I want to see a stoppage. If this is a close unanimous decision, I start to get worried. If it's a split decision and I think Spencer won, I'm very concerned. If Spencer beats him or knocks him out, I am pretty close to hitting the eject button.
I think that that's very fair. But listen, how many times did George Kambosos win questionable decisions or have bad losses, and, you know, that fan base still shows up for him?
I mean, that is true, but I just think that, like, I mean, last year was a tough year for Tim. You know, he took 2 brutal fights, 2 physically hard fights. He also took damage to his skull that in his comeback fight, he immediately touches that cut or look to the forehead. I just have concerns just about durability. You know, it's not as much about the opponent. It's just like, he went through a lot of battles last year, and he might not be the same guy.
Very true.
Okay, undercard bouts. We're gonna get to them. Basically the guy that fought Mattia Tapia. What's his name? It's a crazy one. I'm looking for the Endry Saavedra is on the undercard. I assume, and I should never assume, that he is on the undercard to get an opportunity that if he wins, that maybe those two would rematch. It was a good fight. But let's go to the card I will be at, which is Torrez versus Vianello. What are your thoughts on this?
Man, I love this matchup, and just in the last few fights in the last few years, Richard's really starting to take the type of fights, that we've wanted to see from him. It's been so obvious that there's a lot of talent there, and it started to make it look like the promoter was questioning him when somebody as good as him would be in with these lower level opponents, and then Curtis is so low that Curtis Harper was like this big step up fight for him that he won very easily. Now the Brandon Moore fight, I can't remember the kid from the last fight, but he was super impressive in the last one. And I think that Guido is a real guy. I mean, he's never going to be the best heavyweight in the world, but he's a legitimate contender who can beat anyone on any given night. And I think he's shown, to have a winning mentality. And it may be the first time that Richard's really been in with a guy this good with this level of confidence.
As a professional, we need to caveat it.
Yeah, as a professional.
Yeah, so I mean, I think it's just compelling. I've been very high on Torrez.
That was the guy's name, Isaac Munoz.
Yeah, I'm excited about this. I think I see Torrez as kind of Tommy Morrison, explosive, gonna bomb you out.
Better, bro. I personally think he's better. I think he's more reliable. I'm guessing it doesn't seem that he's a drug addict or an alcoholic or a party boy.
No, but I'm saying, I think his fighting style reminds me of Tommy, not the lifestyle. I guess that's the thing.
I'm saying even in the fighting style, I think he's way less hittable.
For sure, but I think that if we're gonna compare him to somebody, I'd compare him to the excitement Tommy Morrison brought those first 2 to 3 rounds. He could bomb a guy out. The big thing I'm looking at for this fight is who's the cut man, because Guido's been involved in some fights with cuts. Torrez likes to bomb guys out early. There could be a head clash.
100%. I think some of that will come down to also, what style does Vito want to fight, because or Guido, I should say. I'm sorry. He is pretty good on the outside. He can use a long jab. He can fight in different styles. But I think, just like you said, it's inevitable that that's going to happen at some point.
I just feel like Torrez has a lot of explosive burst for someone at his size, and people say he's undersized, but he's a thick boy and he can explode. And I just feel like when he explodes, there's going to be instances where Guido probably can't just keep distance. And then it's going to be like, where does the head go? Where do the elbows go? It feels like there's going to be, the referee's going to matter in this fight. The terms of clinches is going to dictate the fight. I also think who's the more physical fighter will matter, and who absorbs punches. Because if Guido takes Torrez's punches and can hold him, this fight could get weird, because we haven't seen Torrez kind of fight a fight where he doesn't dictate the pace. And I think there is a chance that could happen. If Torrez knocks out Guido quick, he's a guy. He's a guy.
There's no having questions about him anymore.
He's a dude. He's a guy.
I also think there's a possibility that it's kind of technical. They both have good feet. We've seen in more recent fights Richard do some more technical type things. I think that this could be a more thoughtful type of fight.
Yeah, I think that there's 2 chances. Either Torrez comes out strong and tries to have that highlight, or he starts out with a lot of respect. And I think that Guido's probably going to match whatever Torrez does, if that makes sense. I don't think Guido's going to come out and look to dictate the pace. I think Guido's going to try to read the pace that Torrez tries to come with.
Sure. Yeah. Absolutely.
You know what I mean? Because when you're dealing with someone that could bomb you out in 3 rounds, I don't think the best idea is to be like, let me go in there and see what he's got.
Kind of a deep cut too, but Guido has definitely gotten better since this fight in multiple ways. But I remember when I think it was the Kingsley eBay fight. It was one of the bubble fights. And he was boxing good and his feet looked good, but there was something about eBay's physicality and the way he would just kind of bull forward and shove and do things kind of dirty and hit him on the shoulders. Richard does a way more effective, clean version of that. And so I think that could, make him uncomfortable in spots. If, like you said, if Richard can really be the physical guy.
Hey, Susam, man, Torrez may lose. Torres
he
making
might,
it a
bro.
reality.
He fucking might, dude.
Lack of opposition may hurt him. See, I just think that Torres is such a likable figure and character, and just the fact that he didn't fight top-notch guys for being an Olympian has kind of soured him to some fans. But I'm telling you, when he gets his opportunity, you're gonna love him because he's just so sincere. He's so sincere. Let's see what else we got on this undercard. We got Lindolfo Delgado versus Elvis Rodriguez. That
That's
is our
great.
co-feature. Dakota, break down this.
I mean, that's a great fucking fight, man. And I'm not really sure what to make of it because they have both kind of been waiting in the weeds for a little bit as far as a big fight. And maybe they've both started to get a little stale, at least in their most recent performances. But fuck, man. I mean, here's their opportunity. They've been waiting for it. Sometimes guys who are avoided or who can't get big fights need each other. And I think this is one of those.
Well, I mean, it could go two ways. It could be a fight of the year, or it could be a really boring fight. They both have power. They both can be patient, and they both can be explosive and exciting when punching.
And they both have that thing where at one time I was like, oh, this guy's gonna really do something. You know,
it also feels like they've almost fought before in my mind, even though they haven't. Like, it's weird. Like, normally when you see a matchup like this, it really gets me excited. And it feels like, wait, they didn't fight before? Like, in my head, I'm like, I can't even visualize how this fight plays out stylistically. I can't even visualize how they are next to each other. So I'm interested in this fight because, you know, Elvis was clearly going to be a star, and then he lost to Kenny Sims, and that really derailed a lot of stuff for him. I think that was what, 2021 or 2022, something. I think it was probably 2021, right?
Mm-hmm.
So 4 years ago, maybe. Should I do research on that?
No, you're correct.
So that's 4 years ago. He was on the way to being a star. Lindolfo, like, year after year, he's just like really solid, but not good enough to stand out. Like, he doesn't have standout performances. And then when he took that step up fight in Arizona, like, the fight was kind of really dreadful and close, and it just wasn't what you wanted to see a guy do a step up. So I'm just curious to see who wants it. You know, I'm curious to see who's motivated, the hunger. I think another thing is they both come from two good training camps. One's from Freddie Roach, one's Robert Garcia. I think it's just an interesting, good fight, but it's also a fight that I think 70% of fight fans might not have any attachment to.
Well, I think fight fans will. That's not one where people that are casually boxing fans are going to see that and go, oh, wow, two guys who have been waiting in the weeds for 5 years. And, that, you know, they're not going to have that context. But what you're going to see is two really good, solid, technical fighters who at times have been a little bit flatter than their talent level would have led you to suspect. That's the best way I could put it.
Who do you think wins it, Dakota?
I lean Elvis on this one. I'm not sure why. That's just what my gut is telling me. I feel like at his best, he's been a little bit more dynamic. And I was a big Lindolfo guy. But if I have to pick, I'm leaning towards Elvis on this one, man.
The punch volume scares me with Lindolfo because he has that habit of not punching enough, but he hits so hard. Like, that's the great equalizer. It's an interesting fight. Undercard matchups, this is just stacked with really interesting figures. We got Abdullah Mason, Chop Gonzalez, Steven Navarro, Jahai Tucker, Art Barrera. Those are the notable. I mean, those are all really, really solid.
And Troy Williamson's a great fight.
Yeah, I mean, like, just matchup wise, there's a couple of really good ones. Albert Chop Gonzalez versus Dana Coolwell, who just fought Bruce Carrington. Let's see who Abdullah Mason's fighting, because I feel like everyone Abdullah fights.
Ornelas, who I can't say that I completely remember seeing him fight, but he went the distance with Rafael Espinoza. So I think that's worth noting.
He's fighting a tough Mexican guy who's willing to fight him. And Steven Navarro's back in action. I love Steven Navarro. So it's really, to me, undercard showcasing the best young talent with top rank, basically.
Art Barrera, too. We love us some Art Barrera.
I love Art Barrera. He's a little bit of a project, but man, does he have some great traits. You know, like, he has some attributes you can't teach. Pro debut of Sammy Contreras Jr., the son of Sam Contreras, a really nice guy, great boxing guy. And DJ Zamora also, I believe, on the undercard. So really strong undercard. This is definitely a great card to waste an afternoon or an evening with. Like, you could put 5-6 hours into watching this card and you won't be mad. Any standouts for you?
I mean, just in terms of matchups, I'm excited about Jahai Tucker and Troy Williamson. I remember, I haven't seen Williamson in a long time. I know he's taken some losses, but I remember way back in the day, man, not way back, but back in the day, he had a banger of a fight with Ted Cheeseman, the Cheeseman, who I know you and I share an enthusiasm for. And that was a fantastic fight. And I just sort of lost track of Williamson's career after that. But once again, Jahai, just taking a tough fight in a division that's really sleepy. And to me, it just feels like a matter of time before Jahai is like the guy at middleweight.
I mean, would it shock you if Jahai is fighting Janibek in Kazakhstan?
No, I'm dying to see it.
But I mean, like, Jahai's just kind of like the opposite of, like, modern fighters are usually like, I'm all about business. Like, Jahai's like, all right, he thinks he's better than me? Cool. Let's do it. Okay, let's go.
There's no bullshit. There's no bullshit. And that's why I always got so frustrated when Bradley would like rag on him for certain personality traits or whatever. But it was like, how are you going to get mad that this kid just wants to take tough fights and is confident?
Well,
like, what's the hate?
It's like he's like a 10 or 11 fight fighter, and we're mad that he's not a polished 27-0 world champion, and he's taking hard fights on the come up. It's like, wait. We can't, like, if we're going to knock the technique, then maybe talk about, okay, maybe he should be working on this. You can't work on things against certain level of opposition because
what Bradley would do is, like, Jahai would have his hands down and then move his head and make a guy miss mad wild, but then Tim would be like, got his hands down. And it's like, I hear you, Tim, but he just made the guy fucking miss, and you're not watching it.
Yeah, that's the thing that, like, I really like Tim and the ESPN crew. I think they do a good job. But the one fault I will say is they sometimes get stuck on, they see one thing and one thing alone. And it happens on these deep undercard fights.
And with Tim, I'm sorry, he only does it with young guys. And I know that there's some of that, I'm the OG. I did it the hard way, and he's not lying. I got nothing but respect for Tim Bradley, but he starts to sound like an old head hater sometimes when he's talking about some of these young guys.
Back in my day, I used to keep my hands up.
Yeah, back in my day, I used to keep my hands up, and then I'll cut to the clip of Pacquiao dropping you 3 rounds and 3 times in the third fight. You know what I mean? And that's no fault to you. I'm just saying. And with Kriegel, it's like he's got this like writer's narrative that he builds before the fight, and then everything is about trying to get that to fit what he's already.
I really like Kriegel, but I get what you're saying. I think that he's trying to move a telecast forward in a different way. Like, he knows his role and he's trying to, but sometimes the fight doesn't work the way that I think that he was hoping to move it from a storytelling. And that's
a lot to rationalize.
Yeah, I mean, I think the other thing is, if we only had like 6 Timmy and Kriegel fights a year, we'd be like, dude, these guys are the best. I think part of it too is the fact that for years they were doing 18, 20 fights. You do that many, you see the good and the bad of everything, So I think that's the thing. Janibek is having a world title fight in Kazakhstan. I know nothing about his opponent. What are your thoughts?
Better active than not active, right?
But, like, what do you think of his career at this point?
I don't really think anything of it because I don't get to watch it, and he doesn't take opponents that are meaningful. At least Adamus and Hamza Shiraz got up in that ring and had kind of a stinker against each other, but they got the matchup in, and I don't know what's stopping Janibek from happening. For all I know, everyone could be ducking him and avoiding him and scared shitless of him, but he's just not in compelling fights. And now I don't even know that this is televised, so it's not accessible.
Well, he's fighting a fighter from France, and we saw with Bruno that was a tough one. And this guy, he beat Fedor Chuzinian, who was undefeated in somewhere in Europe. And other than that, he has fought a lot of guys that aren't really super distinguished. So, I mean, he's a 5'9" middleweight, ranked number 9 in the world by BoxRec. It's just a tough hang, right? Because it's like
he's fighting the top ranked guy. I don't know what belt he has, but he's just taking on the top ranked
the guy that said yes, the guy
Yeah.
that's in the rankings that said yes, that will fight him there. That's probably what he's doing. The tough thing with Janibek is he arguably could be a pound for pound top 10 fighter, but he had a terrible performance against Denzel Bentley, and we don't really see him fight all that often in America anymore. And that Bentley performance was one where he needed a great performance that made people forget about it. And he just hasn't followed that performance up to really shock the world. And the matchups, for whatever reason, just aren't happening.
Where's that Troy Isley fight? I'm trying to see that.
Is Bernardo Asuno still with ESPN? I don't know. Like, I don't know what's going on with the ESPN telecast. I know I enjoy it. But I enjoy boxing, so I enjoy all the telecasts. I didn't enjoy the Golden Boy one as much, but I don't think that's Golden Boy's fault. I think when you go to certain parts of Mexico, it's hard to have a clear feed.
I mean, Jesus Christ, the audio video in all of boxing is at an all-time low. It's really, I could really rant about that for a bit.
Remember the Angulo Kirkland fight where like they did that in Mexico and like the audio was cutting in and out? Like, I feel like,
but on ESPN, that says nothing to do with Mexico. On ESPN, the first fucking 10 minutes, they had no audio. They kept cutting it off and then putting audio
technical difficulties during Chance's fight. Yeah.
Well, I don't understand. If I fuck up at my job, I get fired, right? I don't understand how this happens in every promoter over and over again, that they don't understand that the AV is a part of the production. It's mind-blowing to me.
Joe Joyce, Filip Hrgovic, thoughts?
That feels like Hrgovic should dominate that fight, right? Like that would be my instinct would tell me that. But again, there's unanswered questions about Hrgovic, and I think that if any version of Joe Joyce shows up and lets his hands go a lot, and Hrgovic doesn't want to fight really, that it could get uncomfortable. But it feels like a fight that Hrgovic should dominate.
Also feel like Hrgovic, if you get him past the 5th round, he is not a happy dude.
Yeah.
It feels like he's a very good 5-round fighter, and then that second half to the fight, he is not excited about that second half.
Yeah, we just don't really know what he's bringing at this point. And Joyce could be a good guy, you know, to ask those questions.
What, like, the winner, where do they go? Is this like you fight Moses at Tuma, an exciting prospect with like veteran? It's hard for me to imagine where the winner of this fight goes.
I think they go in the mix. So, and it depends on how you win. If Hrgovic wins a split decision and it's do or die, I don't think that does anything for him. If he goes out there and smokes Joe Joyce, I think it just keeps him in the mix. It keeps him in the top 10, top 15, where it's like maybe you get an F.A. Ajagba fight, or maybe you get, you know, the winner of him and Bacoli or something, you know, in that realm.
Yeah, I mean, it's a weird fight. Stylistically, I have trouble visualizing how it plays out, to be honest with you. I mean, you would think Hrgovic would win because he's younger and seems to have more in the tank, but the way he lost really
It's about his interest level.
Yeah, it's just like, this is going to be a hard one for me to pay attention to be honest. I'm going to be out of town. There's going to be other stuff going on. I'm probably going to see like a circulated like news article or something recapping it, and if it sounds compelling, I'll go and I'll see the fight or whatever. I probably will watch a highlight video on YouTube from DAZN, to be honest. Like, it lacks the world championship level interest for me. And that's not a knock on the fighters or the promotion. It's just, it doesn't quite have that compelling matchup where it feels as consequential as other bouts. It feels like a really fun European heavyweight fight that if you lived in Europe, it's like, hey, these are two really good heavyweights, but it doesn't seem to have that grandiose that me as a boxing guy, week in, week out, I want to see a fight that matters to the top 15. Like Torrez Vianello to me tells me something about where heavyweight's at. This tells me something, but it's more the back end, and it's more like this might be a fun fight. I'm not looking at this as creating a contender per se.
I think it's just, it all comes down to how Hrgović performs. That's really what this fight's about.
So this fight is Hrgovic's fight in your mind. This is
Yeah,
all about what
the
Hrgovic does.
The thing is, if Joyce goes out there and just wipes Hrgovic out, that says more about him, because we've seen Joyce get smoked by Zhilei Zhang. We've seen him lose decisions to 40-year-old Derek Chisora. So we have a sense of where Joyce is at and what to expect. And so if he goes out there and dominates Hrgovic, I feel like that's more of a statement on Hrgovic than anything.
So now let's go to our friends at ProBox TV. And by the way, we're almost done with the show. So if you have questions and comments that you want to leave, be sure to leave those right now. So then we can get to them at the end of the show. ProBox TV will be in Philadelphia this coming week. I love good Philadelphia, and I love ProBox. Ricardo Salas is taking on Kent Cruz. We got Mike-Juan Williams, our guy, taking on Antonio Moran. Haven Brady Jr. against D'Angelo Keys. Dante Free Smoke Benjamin's on the card. Gio Lopez versus Rene Alvarado. These are the bouts listed right now. Very exciting card. As you know, with ProBox, you may or may not know who they're fighting, but there's going to at least be one banger on the card. That's the ProBox special.
Is Mike-Juan at 140 or 147?
Mike-Juan is at 140.
Ah, damn. Okay, I was going to say him and Rohan Polanco is a fight that
would be a great fight. I mean, I feel like Mike-Juan's one of these guys where all the real guys know there's something special there. He's also a little inconsistent, which I think also makes him it possible for him to get big fights, because he's been up and down. He's had fights where he's looked normal, but when he's on, he really looks like a top 10 contender.
I've only ever seen him switched on, so I don't know what that other version of him is. So for me, when I've seen him, it's like, this is a no-brainer.
He's had some nights where he's been off. He's had nights where he doesn't look the part of a top guy. But what I also say is we live in an era where we see fighters too much. So back in the day, like, guys would have adversities and they'd get to TV and they were polished. Remember when it was like, I remember distinctly the last kind of HBO debut I saw was, this is Gilberto Zordo Ramirez. He's making his HBO debut. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. He'll fight for a title soon. It used to go, and now I'm doing the old head thing. It used to go developmental series, which was ESPN Friday Night Fights mostly for me, or Top Rank internet undercards. Remember, you'd go to Top Rank and you could watch the undercard. And then from there, you'd go to HBO or Showtime or whatever the big. But for me, I was excited about the HBO. And there was an actual debut on HBO. So you'd go, oh, this is so-and-so's debut on the network. And it was a big deal. This is their Showtime debut. And there was a level. And I think that you and me talk about this a bit, but we've lost a little bit of that. I wouldn't say class system, but like the levels to fighting. Like we can't really differentiate.
Every card had the same objective. Outside of ProBox, it felt like every card's had the same objective.
I think that, like, we've got a good new developmental series between ProBox, OTX Boxing, Dimitri Salidas, Big Time Fights USA, and Tom Loeffler's 360 Promotions Hollywood Fight Nights. The issue is, I think it's Lukey and Dakota that watch those. So they're not just the thing about ESPN Friday Night Fights and Tuesday Night Fights, and maybe this is just a me thing, right? Maybe this is just a getting older thing. But I think that people used to stumble on those cards. You know, they're like at home, oh, boxing's on. And if it's a compelling fight, oh, I've seen this guy fight. I watched him on a Friday night or a Tuesday night. I saw this guy. And there was like a trickle-down effect of Bernard Hopkins. Why do I know that name? Oh, I watched him like a couple of times for a round and I saw his name. And I think that the thing that kind of bums me out a little bit, I think ProBox is the best at this, right? Because they have it on YouTube, and I think people use YouTube like television now, so people can stumble across it. And OTX does that, but you know, I definitely feel like people don't like who was the fighter that Ramon Cardenas. He's fighting Inoue. He just had that banger of a fight against Brian Acosta. I've heard a lot of people ask me who's Ramon Cardenas, and it's like, that's disappointing because ProBox is putting on these great, exciting cards. Cardenas coming off an exciting bout. And then, you know, but I'm ranting.
It's also understandable that they wouldn't know who he is. He's a mandatory for a belt. He wasn't even the mandatory. He was the number 2 and the number 1 was unranked. I didn't know who he was until the last fight. And I think that he's very talented. He's a fantastic fighter. He's clearly not on the level of Inoue.
It's a tough fight, though. You know why? Because he's a puncher.
I'm not saying it's an easy fight. I'm saying I don't think he's at that level.
As we know, the great equalizer for being on that level is punching.
Sure.
So let's get to the questions. If you got questions, get them in quick. We're about to wrap up. Jesus M says, Joe, Joyce, Philip, loser, may consider retirement. Dakota, what do you think?
Might not be a bad idea, honestly. If Hrgović can't get up past this level of opponent at this point in his early 30s, I don't know where you go from here. And for Joyce, I think we've witnessed his peak and decline now. And now it's about, what does he have left?
Yeah, I think it just becomes a hard journey if you stay in the sport for either guy, really. But if you lose this fight, you're going to go to a place in boxing where you're, for lack of a better word, you're fighting a lot of young, talented guys. And it's just not very fun. You're going to be going in and you're going to
you're somebody's, you get a little name value on their record.
You're no longer the press release fighter, right? You're no longer the person that they're doing montages about. You're the guy that they're saying, look, this guy used to be, they thought that he had a lot of potential. There's a lot of past tense when they're bringing you up. This guy, man, we thought he was going to be, he used to, he trained with.
It's all past tense when we talk about Joe Joyce. So that's why it's so imperative on Hrgović to impress.
How much has Hrgović fallen in the past year to you?
I mean, enough where there's questions. Again, we've watched Daniel Dubois ascend to the top of the division, so I think that's a loss that will age well. It feels like the loss to Zhang has aged well with, obviously mixed performances, but him having wins over some other top guys. I think that there's room for redemption with him.
So I'm looking up his record just to be factually accurate. His last fight was his only career loss, and that was to Daniel Dubois. He actually beat Zhang, but most people don't believe that he won that fight because it was,
He won it, but it was close and it wasn't a good performance.
And I think that's when people started to wonder about him. He was kind of billed as kind of like a Janibek, like an unbeatable monster. A foreign, like a 80s pro wrestler, a foreign bad guy. Not to say he's a bad guy, but
Vladimir Klitschko type.
Yeah, he had some of that vibe to him. And then after that fight, you saw a lot of habits that you don't want to see at the highest level of the sport. And then I think Dubois kind of brought those back, but then stopping him in such a way where you go, oh, damn. Is there a way to come back from this? So I get what you're saying. I think that for Hrgović, he has to win. For Joyce, I think he's a fight or two past where I think he should have retired, if we're being honest.
Sure.
Dakota,
he's taking a lot of punishment too.
What do you want to conclude the show with? What are your final thoughts, and where can people follow you?
Well, you can always follow me at the Slip and Weave Podcast, at the Lukey Boxing Show, and at ITR Boxing on Instagram and YouTube. Hell of an episode this week. Really looking forward to Torrez and Vianello. That's a great main event and a great card.
Yeah, it's stacked card. And I look forward to coming back on basically no sleep and jumping on a podcast with you from being live. That'll be a fun one. I'm gonna have bags under my eyes for that episode, and we're gonna be loving it. So take care, guys. I hope you enjoyed the show, and we will be back next week. Hopefully, I build the stream earlier so you can check it out, but take care.